Now, obviously, we saw maybe one of the most dramatic 2 or 3 hours in football transfer history when Spurs were, everybody all day. I mean, I had thumbnails ready for the announcement or the Here We Go, the Jacobs Cracker, the Ornstein Bomber, the Spurs, Eze, Palace, everything was at total agreement and it was over the line. And then it almost felt not out of nowhere because we know the links were there. And I want to, again, to anyone who wasn't watching, Eze to Arsenal links, they were not just exclusively revealed by Ben Jacobs. It was on the football terrace. This comes out, and there's not enough flowers to Ben being given out, I think, in the industry for that. And not that Ben seeks it, but he deserves it. But we saw Arsenal come back in. They hijacked the deal. They've landed the player. Reports have suggested this, just in the last hour or so that Crystal Palace and Arsenal have signed all the documents for the Eze move now as well.
Yeah, so a bit of backstory here. First of all, the flowers and all of that thing, it's our job to report on the news. So it's kind of funny how when we get something right, which is hopefully more often than not, you get a lot of praise and you think, well, that is the job. If you get it wrong more often than right, then you're not really doing your job. So not really in it for the catchphrases or the credit or anything like that. We're just working hard to try and bring you the news as accurately as we can. But the backstory here is, as you kind of allude to, back in June, as I broke, Eberechi Eze was added to Arsenal's list of targets. July, Mikel Arteta and Andrea Berta met face-to-face with Eze over the course of a weekend, and they spoke for over 3 hours, and Eze was sold on Arsenal. We know he's an Arsenal fan. We know that he has a very strong emotional connection to the club. And basically, without discussing financials at that point, Eze said, I want to come back, because he spent his youth career at Arsenal. And we also know that Palace to Arsenal, these kind of moves happen and have happened historically. So there's always a bit of synergy between Crystal Palace and Arsenal. So it's very much a full circle moment now for Eberechi Eze. Then it went a little bit quiet. Arsenal went to Crystal Palace and said, we're not going to trigger the release clause. And then Ethan Nwaneri signed a new deal. And Andrea Berta and Mikel Arteta and Tim Lewis decided Nwaneri's going to get time on the right and at number 10. Noni Madueke is going to get time on the right and time on the left. We're not so sure that we need a number 10. So Arsenal backed off. Concurrent with all of this June, July was Tottenham, who appreciated Eze, but backed off. And Tottenham sources in June, July said, we're not bidding. That proved to be correct as well. They went for Morgan Gibbs-White. They didn't get him. They triggered a release clause. Forest disputed it. Morgan Gibbs-White signed a new deal. Maddison injured his ACL. And then by about 2 weeks ago, Spurs said, we need to react. We're going to come in for Eberechi Eze. At that point, it was a one-horse race and Arsenal were not there. Then, ironically, because Tottenham were catalysed by Maddison's injury, Kai Havertz picked up an injury and Arsenal came back in. So it was a hijack, but Arsenal were also there first. And that legwork that took place in June, July, plus the fact that Eze, I think I said this on the football terrace as well, if both clubs agree a deal with Crystal Palace, Eze was always going to pick Arsenal, and Arsenal knew that. But adding to the craziness was another part of this story, that on the Friday before the Premier League season started, Eberechi Eze's 60 million plus 8 million release clause expired. And on that Friday, outside of that release clause, Tottenham were really close to agreeing a deal. Never had Richarlison in it, never any other player, always just straight cash. They were really close. And that's why Eze thought originally he might not play against Chelsea. Had Daniel Levy bitten the bullet, and hindsight is a wonderful thing because they didn't think Arsenal were going to enter the race on that Friday. Had Levy bitten the bullet on Friday and done the deal, Eberechi Eze would be holding up a Spurs shirt. Then flash forwards to the Tuesday, Crystal Palace were delaying a little bit because they knew by that point that Arsenal were going to enter. In addition, they were looking for a replacement. But on that Tuesday, as I broke, Spurs got to an agreement in principle with Crystal Palace for a similar number to Arsenal have done the deal for, 60 million plus add-ons. They also had terms in place with Eze, but Palace were delaying. Palace were looking for a replacement. Palace thought at that point that Eze would play in the Conference League last night. Arsenal moved by the Wednesday morning, knowing Havertz had a knee injury, and they got the deal done in about 2 hours, and they knew that they always had the player buy-in. So it was this incredible drama of Tottenham against Arsenal both with agreements in principle. A lot of Spurs fans coming back to me after the story broke he was going to Arsenal saying, but didn't he have a deal with us? Yes, he did. Tottenham got the agreement in principle on the Tuesday afternoon. Arsenal got the agreement in principle on the Wednesday afternoon. But crucially, Crystal Palace knew that Arsenal were coming on Tuesday morning. So Eze was waiting for Arsenal to materialise. And once there were two horses in the race, Eze was always going to pick Arsenal. But yeah, one of the craziest stories of any window.
I think also, I mean, you've explained this many times over the last 2 to 3 years since we've been doing these shows together, that players can often sometimes agree personal terms with multiple clubs, not just two, but still have preferences. And I think sometimes fans, and this isn't a dig at any other type of journalist, but sometimes people get suckered in by the sort of the lack of detail and the very short and concise updates, as opposed to listening to how they absolutely operate. And as you say, I think from a fan's perspective, which we all are fans of the game, it was just manic on Wednesday evening. I thoroughly enjoyed the night, if I'm being honest. It was funny watching the meltdowns. It was great watching the excitement. We had a guy that comes on our show, Zigal, who a day or two before had done a video where when the agreement in principle was made with Palace, and he's an Arsenal fan, he was questioned. Someone said, what do you make of this deal that Spurs are getting over you? And he said, I don't believe it. I said, for me, I still think he'll be an Arsenal player. I said, Spurs can pay for his hotel room for the night, but it'll be coming to us. And everyone laughed at him. Now, he didn't know anything. It was just a fan reaction. And then essentially it's happened. And I've said all along, they should be getting him in for the announcement video. He should be walking out of a hotel, handing his key to check out, and it should be a gal, should be the guy taking it off him. Yeah. They could make it would be brilliant. But yeah, it was an amazing night.
I think they're also
sorry, go on.
Challenge when you report these stories is that Chinese whispers kind of happen. So if you note my reporting, Tottenham have agreed a fee with Palace, and Palace are now seeking a replacement. So people hear agreement and they think with personal terms in place, that means the player's joining. And then people might twist that and say Eberechi Eze to join Spurs after fee agreed. But I didn't say joining Spurs. I said they've agreed a fee. I didn't say that there was medical booked. I didn't say that the deal was done. And the reason for that is because Palace were waiting on a replacement and Palace were waiting on Arsenal. And as we now know, but we didn't on that Tuesday, Eze was also waiting on Arsenal. So agreement in principle just means you've got the club-to-club bit done, and agreeing the terms or financials with the players doesn't mean that they have given you a green light. I know several Saudi deals where the fee's been agreed, the terms have been agreed with the player, but has the player said yes to Saudi and the project? Not yet. So Eberechi Eze was waiting and Palace were waiting. And I think Tottenham's error in this was not this week. Tottenham's error in this was on Friday, when there was still an active release clause, or when they could have done the deal outside of the release clause. And Arsenal on that Friday were not in the race. By the time they got to Monday, Tuesday, Tottenham felt like Palace were the roadblock. Palace were looking for a replacement. Palace wanted to delay so they could have him play in the UEFA Conference League game on Thursday. Obviously, Arsenal put pay to that and said no, but Tottenham were prepared to let him play in that game. So Tottenham's error was not anticipating, but maybe they couldn't have done because it was partially, if not entirely, catalyzed by the Kai Havertz injury. So Tottenham thought they were in a one-horse race, and they ended up losing what was a two-horse race because they didn't anticipate the other horse in Arsenal coming from behind. Now, whether or not that's only on Daniel Levy, but I just think this late in the transfer window, if you're quibbling over small things for a player of Eze's caliber that would transform Tottenham's window and get the fan base excited, there's definitely a logic that on that Friday, even if Tottenham thought they were the only suitor at that point in the race, they should have bitten the bullet and made damn sure that they got Eze out of that match day squad, not risking him picking up an injury against Chelsea, sending a message to the market, this guy's out of the squad because we're signing him, get the deal done on the Friday, and this story may not have unfolded. But as soon as we got to the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Kai Havertz's injury hit, Arsenal were intent on moving. And unfortunately for Tottenham, Arsenal versus Spurs for Eze, who's an Arsenal fan, who started his career at Arsenal, Tottenham were never going to win that race.